Belgium's Africa Museum. I expected Rwanda, but found Congo. I went to Belgium's Africa Museum in Tervuren with a very simple expectation. I'm Rwandan. I know the history connecting Belgium to Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So before I entered this museum, I imagined that I was going to discover the history of these three countries, Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo. Maybe not equally, but I expected all three to occupy an important place.
Then I walked inside, and room after room, object after object, photograph after photograph, one country kept appearing again and again. Congo, Congo, and more Congo. And I remember thinking to myself, wait a minute, where is Rwanda? Where is Burundi? That question stayed in my mind throughout my visit, but by the time I left the museum, I had begun to understand why. And surprisingly, this visit also made me think differently about Rwanda, Congo, Belgium, and the history that still connects us today.
Welcome to Rwanda Digest. Today, I want to take you with me inside the Africa Museum in Tervuren, Belgium. Not as a historian giving you a lecture, but simply as a Rwandan telling you what I saw, what surprised me, what I learned, and what I was thinking as I walked through this extraordinary place. If you have never visited this museum, I hope that after watching this video you will want to see it for yourself. Because whether you are Rwandan, Burundian, Congolese, Belgian, or simply interested in African history, this is a place worth experiencing. The official name is the Royal Museum for Central Africa, but today it is commonly known as the Africa Museum. And the first thing we need to understand is that this institution was originally much more connected to Congo than its present name might suggest. Its origins go back to 1897. King Leopold II organized a colonial section in Tervuren as part of the Brussels International Exposition. It was designed partly to promote his colonial project in Congo to the Belgian public and potential investors. And there is a disturbing part of that history. Congolese men, women, and children were brought to Belgium and displayed in recreated villages in Tervuren. The museum itself says 267 Congolese were brought there, and 7 died during the exhibition. Think about that for a moment. This beautiful place that people visit today has roots in one of the darkest periods of European colonialism. In 1898, the temporary exhibition became a permanent Museum of the Congo. That fact alone helped me understand what I was seeing more than a century later. Because I had entered the building thinking Belgium colonized Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi, therefore I expected a museum about all three. But historically, the institution itself was born around Congo. The collections were built primarily around Congo. The museum itself acknowledges today that the vast majority of its objects originate from the Democratic Republic of Congo and were collected during the colonial period. So suddenly, what I was seeing started to make sense. This wasn't simply an Africa museum that one day decided to give Congo most of the space. Congo is embedded in the DNA of the institution. Rwanda and Burundi entered Belgium's colonial story differently and later. Germany had controlled Rwanda and Burundi during the colonial partition of Africa. During the First World War, Belgian forces occupied the territories, and Belgium subsequently administered Rwanda-Urundi under an international mandate and, later, a United Nations trusteeship, until independence in 1962. So Belgium's relationship with Rwanda and Burundi was real, consequential, and deeply important. But it wasn't identical to Belgium's relationship with Congo. And Congo itself is enormous. You cannot compare the geographic scale of Rwanda or Burundi with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Congo is almost a continent within a continent. Its peoples, languages, kingdoms, cultures, natural resources, ecosystems and history are extraordinarily diverse. So when I began looking at the museum through that perspective, my surprise slowly became curiosity. Instead of asking only, why is there so much Congo, I started asking, what exactly am I learning about Congo? And that is where the visit became much more interesting to me. Because everywhere you look, you are reminded of how deeply Belgium's history became intertwined with Congo. Politics, religion, science, mining, transportation, art, culture, natural resources, colonial administration. Even the building itself is connected to that history. The museum says that much of the financing for Leopold II's construction projects at Tervuren came from profits generated by his private domain in Congo. And that changes the way you look at the building. You stop seeing only beautiful architecture. You start asking, where did the money come from? Who produced that wealth? What happened to the people living on the land from which that wealth was extracted? Those questions followed me as I continued walking. And inevitably, I started thinking about King Leopold II. I don't want to turn this video into a complete history of Leopold because I believe that deserves a separate video, and I intend to make one. But you cannot seriously visit this museum and ignore him. Before 1908, Congo was not simply a Belgian colony in the conventional sense. The Congo Free State was under Leopold II's personal control. That period became infamous for forced labor, violence, mutilation, hostage-taking, exploitation, and catastrophic population loss. There continues to be historical debate about exact population loss estimates and about whether genocide is the correct legal or historical classification. I don't need to resolve that debate in this video. What is beyond serious dispute is the enormous brutality inflicted on Congolese communities under that system. And standing there in Belgium, looking at these objects, photographs, maps, and representations of Congo, I found myself thinking about the human beings behind all of this. Not numbers, people, families, villages, generations. That made the museum emotional for me in a way I hadn't expected. And then another thought entered my mind. Rwanda, my own country. Here I was, looking at this enormous country, Congo, looking at its history, looking at everything Congolese people have already endured. And I couldn't avoid thinking about what has happened in eastern Congo since the wars that began in the 1990s. I thought about the relationship between Rwanda and Congo today. I thought about the accusations, documented conflicts, armed groups, displacement, minerals, borders, security arguments, and the countless civilians who have suffered through decades of instability. And it saddened me. Because when you stand in a museum surrounded by evidence of what colonial exploitation did to this region, you realize how tragic it is that Africans are still fighting Africans over territory, security, political power, and resources. For me, that became one of the strongest personal lessons of this visit. This is my interpretation. Someone else can visit the same museum and leave with a completely different conclusion. That's exactly why I encourage you to visit it yourself. Don't simply accept my opinion. Go, walk through the rooms, read the explanations, look at the objects, look at the photographs, study Congo, study Rwanda, study Burundi, and form your own opinion. Because there is much more here than what you see in the exhibition rooms. This institution is also a major scientific and archival center. According to the museum, its collections include around 170,000 historical photographs relating to Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo, approximately 650 films concerning the three countries from the colonial period, around 120,000 ethnographic objects, thousands of maps, and millions of biological specimens. And the museum says only about 1% of its enormous heritage collections is displayed in the permanent exhibition. Think about that. What you see walking through the museum is only a tiny fraction of what this institution actually holds. Its archives include hundreds of collections concerning European exploration, Leopold II's colonial expansion, the Congo Free State, and Belgian colonial rule. It also preserves thousands of letters, maps, photographs, films, administrative documents, and other historical material. For researchers from Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo, that is extremely important. Some pieces of our history are sitting thousands of kilometers away from our countries. And that creates another difficult question. Who owns history? If an African object was taken during colonialism and sits inside a European museum today, who should possess it? Who should interpret it? Who gets to tell its story? The museum itself now openly acknowledges that some objects in Western collections were obtained through violence or unlawful means. And it conducts provenance research into how objects entered its collections. Those are uncomfortable conversations, but I believe we need them. Not because we should remain trapped in the past, quite the opposite. We need to understand the past so that we don't keep repeating it. And this is why I would especially encourage Rwandans living in Belgium, France, Germany, the Netherlands, or elsewhere in Europe to visit this museum if you have the opportunity. I would say the same thing to Burundians, and especially to Congolese. If you're Congolese and you've never been to Tervuren, this museum contains an extraordinary amount of material connected to your country's history. You may love parts of the exhibition. You may disagree with other parts. You may become angry. You may become proud. You may leave with more questions than answers. That's okay. A museum shouldn't always tell you what to think. Sometimes its greatest value is making you think. And that's what happened to me. I entered expecting Rwanda. I found Congo. But strangely enough, finding Congo also made me think more deeply about Rwanda, about our history, about our neighbors, about colonialism, about power, and about the responsibility that our generation has toward the future. Because borders may separate Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo today, but history has tied our peoples together in ways that cannot simply be erased. Belgium's colonial history tied these countries together. Migration tied us together. Trade tied us together. Conflict tied us together. Culture tied us together. And geography will continue to tie us together long after today's political leaders are gone. So perhaps the most important question isn't why I found so much Congo inside Belgium's AfricaMuseum. Perhaps the more important question is, what can Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, and Belgium learn from the history preserved inside this building? That answer belongs to all of us. For me, this visit was only the beginning. There is another story I want to explore. King Leopold II. What exactly happened in Congo under his rule? How did one European king come to personally control a territory many times larger than Belgium? Where did the wealth go? How many people suffered? And, more than a century later, how should Belgium remember Leopold II? That will be another Rwanda Digest investigation. For now, if you ever find yourself in Belgium, consider making the trip to Tervuren. Visit the AfricaMuseum. Don't go there looking only for confirmation of what you already believe. Go there with questions. Look carefully, read, listen, and then make up your own mind. Because sometimes you enter a museum expecting to learn about the past, and you walk out thinking about the present. I went to Belgium's AfricaMuseum expecting Rwanda. I found Congo. And I left thinking about both. This is Rwanda Digest. Thank you for watching.